Most people think of mushrooms as something they have to buy from the supermarket. You pick up a small plastic box, bring it home, and hope the mushrooms are still fresh enough before they become soft, watery, or lose their flavor. But once you understand how mushrooms are actually grown, it becomes clear that buying them from the store is not the only option. Mushrooms can be grown at home in practical ways. The first method is outdoors, using hardwood logs. This approach is slower, but it can produce mushrooms for several years once the wood is properly colonized. The second method is indoors, using a controlled growing station where humidity, airflow, light, and temperature are easier to manage. One of the most traditional and reliable outdoor methods is growing shiitake mushrooms on logs. This technique has been used for a long time in Japan and other parts of Asia because it follows the natural way many mushrooms grow in forests. In the wild, fungi break down dead wood and turn it into nutrients. When growers place mushroom spawn into fresh hardwood logs, they are simply helping that natural process happen in a more controlled way. The surprising part is how simple the basic system can be. You need suitable wood, mushroom spawn, shade, moisture, and patience. Hardwood logs are often inexpensive, and in some places they can even be found for free from fallen trees, tree trimming services, or recently cut branches. The first harvest may take many months, sometimes close to a year or more, but the reward is fresh mushrooms with a quality that is difficult to match in a supermarket. They are firmer, more aromatic, and can be used fresh, dried, or preserved for later meals. So instead of seeing mushrooms as a product that only comes from a store shelf, it helps to see them as a crop that can be grown in shaded spaces, small corners, and even simple indoor setups. Let's start with the outdoor method first, because it is usually the cheapest and most natural way to grow mushrooms at home. Outdoor mushroom growing takes longer than indoor growing, but it has one major advantage: it can turn shaded and use space into a productive food growing area. Most vegetables and fruiting plants need direct sunlight for strong growth, but many mushrooms prefer the opposite. They grow best in cool, shaded, and moist conditions. This means a corner of a yard, the side of a shed, a shaded balcony, or even a small outdoor area that does not receive much sun can become useful. You do not need a large garden, raised beds, or expensive equipment. The basic idea is simple. Instead of growing mushrooms in soil like vegetables, you give the fungi a food source, usually hardwood. Over time, the mushroom mycelium spreads through the wood, breaks it down, and eventually produces edible mushrooms when the conditions are right. For people who want to grow more food at home but do not have much sunny space, mushrooms are a smart option. They use areas that are often ignored, and once the logs are established, they can keep producing harvests season after season. The first important step in outdoor mushroom growing is choosing the right wood. Different mushroom species prefer different types of wood, so this part should not be guessed randomly. Shiitake mushrooms, for example, are commonly grown on hardwoods such as oak, beech, maple, chestnut, or similar dense woods. Oyster mushrooms can grow on a wider range of materials, but they still perform well on many hardwoods. Other species, such as chicken of the woods, also need suitable host wood to grow properly. A simple way to begin is to choose the mushroom species first, then find out which wood types are recommended for that species. The other option is to look at what wood is already available. Identify the tree, and then choose a mushroom variety that matches it. Freshly cut hardwood is usually preferred because it still contains enough moisture and nutrients for the mushroom mycelium to colonize. However, the wood should not be too old, rotten, or already covered with competing fungi. If another fungus has already taken over the log, the mushroom spawn may struggle to establish itself. The size of the logs also matters. A practical size is usually around 3 to 4 feet long and about 4 to 8 inches in diameter. Logs in this range are large enough to feed the fungi for several years, but still small enough for one person to move and arrange without too much difficulty. There are several ways to find suitable logs. Some people contact local tree trimming companies because those companies often need to remove branches or trunks after cutting trees. In some cases, they may be willing to provide hardwood pieces that would otherwise be discarded. Fallen trees after storms can also be useful, as long as the wood is fresh and safe to collect. If the tree species is difficult to identify, a plant identification app or a local tree guide can help. This matters because using the wrong wood can lead to poor colonization, weak mushroom production, or complete failure. So before buying mushroom spawn, the best approach is to match three things carefully: the mushroom species, the wood species, and the condition of the log. When those three elements are right, the outdoor system has a much stronger chance of producing healthy mushrooms over time. Once the right logs have been selected, the next step is adding the mushroom spawn. Mushroom spawn is the living starting material used to grow mushrooms. It usually contains mushroom mycelium growing on a carrier such as sawdust, grain, or small wooden plugs. Mycelium is the root-like network of the fungus. When it enters the log, it slowly spreads through the wood, breaks down the organic material, and prepares the log for future mushroom production. For outdoor log growing, two common options are sawdust spawn and plug spawn. Sawdust spawn can colonize wood slightly faster because it has more surface contact with the log. However, it usually requires a special inoculation tool, and it can be a little messier to use. Plug spawn is often easier for beginners because the spawn is already inside small wooden dowels. These plugs can simply be tapped into drilled holes in the log. The process is straightforward. First, holes are drilled along the log. Some growers use a diamond pattern, while others drill in simple rows. The exact pattern is less important than making sure the holes are evenly spaced so the mycelium can spread through the wood efficiently. After the holes are drilled, the plug spawn is inserted and tapped in until it sits flush with the surface. Then each hole is sealed with food-grade wax. This step is important because the wax helps lock in moisture, protects the spawn from drying out, and reduces the chance of insects, birds, or competing fungi disturbing the inoculation points. Many growers also seal the cut ends of the logs if the wood seems to be drying too quickly. Moisture is one of the most important factors in mushroom growing, especially during the colonization stage. It is also useful to label each log with the mushroom species and the inoculation date. This makes it much easier to track which logs are Shiitake, Oyster, chicken of the woods, or any other variety, since outdoor logs may take many months before fruiting. Clear labels prevent confusion later. At this stage, the log may not look like much has changed, but inside the wood, the mycelium has begun its slow work. Given enough time, moisture, and shade, that hidden network can eventually turn a simple hardwood log into a long-term mushroom-producing system. After the logs have been inoculated, they need to be placed in the right outdoor location. The best area is usually shaded, cool, and protected from harsh direct sunlight. Mushrooms do not grow like vegetables, so they do not need a sunny garden bed. In fact, too much sun can dry out the logs and slow down the colonization process. A shaded side yard, the edge of a wooded area, the north side of a building, or a damp corner under trees can all work well. The goal is to keep the logs moist without letting them sit in standing water. Good airflow is still important, but the logs should not be exposed to hot wind or intense sun for long periods. If the climate is dry, occasional watering may be needed to keep the wood from drying out completely. There are several simple ways to arrange mushroom logs. Some growers stack them in a crisscross pattern, others lean them against a rail, fence, or simple wooden frame. A leaning rack is especially practical because it keeps the logs off the ground, improves airflow, and makes it easier to check them during the fruiting season. A basic rack can be made from sturdy posts and a horizontal beam, but the structure does not need to be complicated. The main purpose is to hold the logs securely while leaving enough space for air movement and future mushroom growth. Another useful point is planning for expansion. Outdoor mushroom growing often becomes easier over time because new logs can be added whenever suitable wood becomes available. Older logs may already be producing, while newer logs are still colonizing. This creates a staggered system where different logs are at different stages. In a well-designed shaded area, even a small collection of logs can become a productive mushroom station. It does not require a large farm or expensive setup. It only requires the right wood, the right mushroom species, steady moisture, and a space where the logs can slowly do their work. Outdoor mushroom growing depends heavily on climate, moisture, and seasonal changes. Not every environment is equally suitable. Many common edible mushrooms prefer temperate conditions, where the weather changes through the year. Periods of warmth, coolness, rain, and dryness all help create natural signals for the fungus. This is one reason log-grown mushrooms often perform well in places with clear seasons. Very hot climates can be more difficult unless the mushroom species is chosen specifically for warm conditions. Dry climates can also be challenging because mushrooms need consistent moisture. If the logs dry out too much, the mycelium may slow down or become weak. In snowy areas, the situation is not always bad. Snow can actually cover and insulate the logs through winter, and the mycelium can continue surviving inside the wood. Patience is one of the most important parts of this method. After inoculation, it is normal for logs to take around 8 months to more than a year before the first harvest appears. Some logs may fruit sooner, while others may take longer depending on the wood type, mushroom species, moisture level, and local weather. Once a log has already produced mushrooms, there is also a technique called force fruiting. This method is often used with shiitake logs. The idea is to soak the log in cold water for several hours or overnight. This sudden change in moisture and temperature can imitate natural rainy, cool weather and encourage the mushroom to produce fruiting bodies. After soaking, the log is placed back in a shaded, humid area. If the log is mature enough and the conditions are right, small mushroom pins may begin to appear within several days. These pins then expand quickly into full mushrooms. However, force fruiting should not be used too aggressively. Logs need rest between harvests so the mycelium can recover and gather energy from the wood again. A common practice is to allow several weeks or even longer between force fruiting cycles, depending on the mushroom species and the condition of the log. This is why outdoor mushroom growing should be seen as a slow, long-term system. It is not instant food production, but once the logs are established, they can provide seasonal harvests with very little equipment, while using shaded spaces that many other crops cannot use well. Outdoor mushroom growing is low cost and natural, but it has one clear limitation: it depends on the season. That is why indoor mushroom growing can be a useful second method, instead of waiting for the right outdoor weather. An indoor setup creates a controlled environment where mushrooms can grow more predictably throughout the year. In mushroom growing, one common indoor setup is often called a Martha tent. It is usually a small plastic-covered shelving unit that holds humidity inside while still allowing airflow to be managed. The purpose is not to make the system complicated. The purpose is to create the basic conditions. Mushrooms need moisture, fresh air, suitable temperature, and a small amount of light. Humidity is one of the most important factors. Many edible mushrooms need high relative humidity during fruiting, often around 80 to 95%, depending on the species. If the air is too dry, young mushroom pins can stop growing or crack. If the space is too wet with poor airflow, contamination and bacterial problems can appear. This is why many indoor setups use a humidifier connected to a humidity controller. The controller turns the humidifier on and off to keep the environment within the right range. This makes the system more stable than simply spraying water by hand. Fresh air exchange is also important. Mushrooms breathe in oxygen and release carbon dioxide. If carbon dioxide builds up too much, some mushrooms can grow long, thin stems and small caps. For a small indoor space, a fan and vent tube can help move stale air out and bring fresher air in. If the grow area is in a basement or closed room, venting the air outdoors is usually safer and cleaner than letting humid air build up inside. Light is another point many beginners misunderstand. Mushrooms do not use light for photosynthesis like plants do. Fungi get their energy by breaking down organic materials such as wood, straw, or sawdust. However, many mushroom species still use light as a signal that helps guide fruiting, shape, and color. They do not need strong direct sun. Indirect window light or a simple artificial grow light is usually enough for many common varieties. Temperature should also be considered. Different mushrooms prefer different ranges, but many common indoor varieties grow well in cool to mild room temperatures. A stable space around 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 15 to 21 degrees Celsius, can work well for several popular mushrooms. So the goal of an indoor mushroom station is simple: create a humid, ventilated, lightly lit, and temperature-stable space. Once those conditions are in place, mushrooms can grow much faster indoors than they usually would on outdoor logs. For indoor growing, one of the easiest options is to use ready-made fruiting blocks. A fruiting block is usually made from a prepared substrate such as sawdust, hardwood pellets, soybean hulls, straw, or a similar material. This substrate has already been inoculated with mushroom mycelium, which means much of the early work has already been done before the block reaches the grower. That is why fruiting blocks are often the most beginner-friendly method. Instead of cutting logs, drilling holes, sealing wax, and waiting many months, a fruiting block can begin producing mushrooms within 1 or 2 weeks after it is placed in the right conditions. Different blocks are available for different mushroom species. Oyster mushrooms are usually one of the easiest choices because they grow quickly and are more forgiving. Lion's mane is also popular because of its unusual texture and culinary value. Chestnut mushrooms, Shiitake blocks, and other specialty varieties can also be grown indoors. But some may need more careful control of humidity, airflow, or temperature. When a block is ready to fruit, small mushroom pins begin to appear. This is the stage where tiny mushrooms first push out from the surface of the substrate. From this point, growth can happen very quickly. Some varieties can go from small pins to harvest size in only a few days. This is why indoor mushrooms should be checked daily. If they are harvested too late, they may become tough, dry, yellowish, or less pleasant in flavor. Oyster mushrooms, for example, are usually best harvested when the caps have opened but before the edges curl too far upward. The first harvest is often the strongest because the block still contains the most available nutrients. However, many blocks can produce a second or even third flush if they are rested and kept in the right conditions. A flush simply means one round of mushroom production. After the block stops producing well, it still has value. It can be buried in a shaded garden bed, placed in a compost pile, or used to improve soil organic matter. Sometimes, spent blocks may even produce a few extra mushrooms outdoors if the weather is favorable. Fruiting blocks are not always the cheapest method because someone else has already prepared the substrate and grown the mycelium for you. But they are fast, simple, and reliable. For anyone who wants to understand mushroom growing without waiting a full year for outdoor logs, fruiting blocks are one of the best places to start. Another indoor method that can produce a large amount of mushrooms at a lower cost is bucket growing. Instead of buying a prepared fruiting block, this method uses a container, a moist growing material, and mushroom spawn. It is especially common for oyster mushrooms because they are fast, aggressive, and able to grow well on materials such as straw or hay. The basic process starts with preparing the substrate. Straw or hay is soaked in water so it can absorb enough moisture. After soaking, it should be drained well. The goal is not to leave it dripping wet, but to make it evenly moist. If the substrate is too dry, the mycelium will struggle to spread. If it is too wet, the bucket may become low in oxygen and more likely to develop contamination. Next, the moist straw or hay is mixed evenly with grain spawn. Grain spawn is simply grain that has already been colonized by mushroom mycelium. When it is mixed through the substrate, the mycelium begins spreading from many points at once, which helps it take over the bucket more quickly. The bucket needs small holes along the sides. These holes allow the mushrooms to grow outward once the substrate is fully colonized. After filling the bucket, it is placed in a humid growing area, such as a mushroom tent or another shaded, moist location with decent airflow. After about 2 weeks, the mycelium can spread through much of the bucket if the conditions are right. Then small pins may begin to appear from the holes. A few days later, those pins can develop into clusters of oyster mushrooms. Bucket growing takes more preparation than using a ready-made fruiting block, but it can be much cheaper and more productive once the process is understood. For people who want larger harvests without spending too much on prepared kits, this method is one of the most practical indoor mushroom systems. Growing mushrooms at home can sound complicated at first, but the basic idea is much more approachable than many people expect. Mushrooms do not need the same conditions as vegetables. They do not need full sun, deep garden beds, or large outdoor space. What they need is the right food source, enough moisture, suitable airflow, and time. Once those needs are understood, mushroom growing becomes a practical skill rather than something mysterious. Outdoor logs are best for people who want a low-cost, long-term system. They take patience, but they can produce seasonal harvests for years. Indoor fruiting blocks are better for fast results because they can produce mushrooms in a week or two under the right conditions. Bucket growing sits somewhere in the middle. It requires more preparation than a block, but it can give larger harvests at a lower cost. The biggest difference is freshness. Supermarket mushrooms may spend days in storage and transport before they reach the kitchen. During that time, mushrooms can lose firmness, aroma, and flavor because they are naturally delicate and high in moisture. Freshly harvested mushrooms, by contrast, can have a cleaner texture, stronger aroma, and better cooking quality. So the lesson is simple. Mushrooms are not only a supermarket product, they can be grown on shaded logs, in small indoor tents, unprepared blocks, or even in buckets of straw. With the right method, even a small space can become a steady source of fresh mushrooms. For anyone interested in growing more food at home, mushrooms are one of the most useful crops to learn. They turn shade into production, turn wood or straw into food, and make it possible to harvest something fresh from places where many other crops would struggle.